Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform. My name is Olga Atamanova. It's been 10 years of the war, and today is day 475 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor. And traditionally, I want to thank all the mass media who tell the world the truth about this war and a heroic resistance. Today, our meeting that we invited you to attend will be dedicated to a very interesting topic. We will be talking about protection and preservation of the Ukrainian segment of internet. And I want to introduce our speakers today. It's Olena Kushnir, advisor to Deputy Minister of Digital Transformation, Director at VEB PRO LLC, Andrii Pylypenko, Counsel for International Law Attorney, and Victoria Opanasyuk, Regional Director at Winner Telecom, Internet Service Provider. Hello, dear friends. Let's start our conversation with the condition of the segment of the industry. What are the problems and what is going on with the IP resources of Ukrainian holders in occupied territories? Please, Ms. Olena, the floor is yours. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank Ukrinform for this opportunity to be here today to cover this problematic issue, and I want to thank my colleagues who agreed to take part and the journalists who expressed interest to this topic. Recently, there was a meeting of the Committee of the Parliament for Foreign Cooperation for access to the wideband internet, and it was my responsibility to cover the topic of what's going on with the IP resources in Ukraine during the Russian aggression, and to tell you about the recent event which took place in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, the conference of RIPE 86 internet providers. So let's start with the basic topic. What is IP resources? The basic level identifier using which we can all exchange information and communicate. In the world, there is a global American non-governmental organization called ICAP, which manages these internet resources. They have IANA submitted to this organization. This is the administration of the address space in the internet, which is distributed into 5 regional internet registrators, so-called RIRs. And Ukraine submits to RAD NCC, regional administrator, which established this conference we attended recently. So now we're mostly talking about IPv4, the resource that we ran out of in the world recently. This resource is very costly and valuable from economic point of view. We try to transfer to IPv6, which is sufficient in the world, but there are certain problems related to replacement of equipment, which is another lengthy and complicated process. No provider, no network operator can exercise their activity without this valuable resource. So what was going on starting from 2014? Let's start there. In the temporarily occupied territories, in the occupied Crimea and so-called DPR and LPR, the internet providers had to get their businesses re-registered, and including this IP resource, with the legal entities which were exercising activity according to the local legislation. So this valuable resource started flowing from Ukrainian market. Those were transfers to the territories which are not recognized anywhere in the world as a separate territories. This is why RIPE is neutral in their activities, and they cannot get concerned with any political situations, and obviously they accept documents from LPR and DPR. And now there are such conditions existing well, it's very surprising neutrality given the conditions in the world, the circumstances in the world. I mean, from the legal point of view, if you want to have some neutrality, so you have to comply with some rules that are existing in the world. Well, we're talking about, say, other expressions of neutrality, such as education, for example. No matter that those are occupied territories, the children, they still are entitled to education, for example. But look, when the occupiers come to the occupied territories, they switch off the GSM, they take control over the internet providers, they switch off those networks from they disconnected from the Ukrainian channels. The Russian companies enter that area, such as Miranda Media, for example. They channel traffic to Crimea, and the Ukrainians as such are feeling yet another experience and yet another way of Russification. They're being given the phone numbers of Russian carriers, they are given Russian passports, and they're given Russian traffic, which results in blocking of Ukrainian internet resources, which is a part of a big propaganda machine. People are being circumvented, people are being obfuscated. For example, when there is nothing left alive to maintain the operation of the network, they use the vehicles for establishing internet channels, internet providing. We had experience when we were communicating with Victoria. We were talking to a lot of network operators, and we know a number of facts when the specialists, technical specialists, were kept in the torture chamber. They were tortured, they were forced to give away their properties, their internet networks, local networks. So it's in fact racketeering, it's in fact raiding, terrible situations. So what are the threats, what are the risks? You may think like, well, okay, they get registered and what? But you have to understand that such registration results, first of all, in informational security, cyber security. From those IP addresses we are getting DDoS attacks. The number of DDoS attacks, according to the official sources, it has grown 3 times lately. As operators, we on a weekly basis experience those DDoS attacks. On top of that, for the holders of IP resources, it results in economic losses. They lose something they can make money on, like provision of internet services, and obviously it creates risks for the life and health. RIPE and CC, before the full-scale invasion, the industry associations were writing letters to them so they don't work with the temporarily occupied territories. But obviously they got no response due to the neutrality status of the organization, and it did not react in any way whatsoever. Then in autumn 2020, Ukrainian delegation, which included me and Victoria and other colleagues of ours, we went to Belgrade. I have to tell you right away, not the most pleasant country, because they're very friendly to Russian world, but still we were risking. We went that way to open the dialogue with the board of RIPE, so we managed to talk to them, and I have to say, first of all, I have to thank them, because as we arrived there, we were received very warmly. We had a number of meetings, consultations with the members of the board of RIPE, the head legal advisor, where we were trying to find ways. Ways out of the situation, because it's new to them and it's of concern to us. And obviously back then we already knew about the examples of illegal transfer, so we brought up that issue again. At that moment we were thinking that we reached certain consensus, but in Ukrainian community, in Ukrainian telecommunication community, there are such so-called IP traders. So they are the people who don't use the IP resources, but they trade the IP addresses. They provide the small communication operators with those IP resources by selling or by lease. And they were present in Belgrade too. And when we offered them, like right here and now, right now, to preserve the Ukrainian segment of the internet, we offered full freeze of the transfers so that they remain in Ukraine. And this is where we received, where we get significant resistance, that there is no problem, that people transfer all those IP addresses voluntarily, they transfer them from Ukrainian segment of the internet, that it all happens in a voluntary manner. And obviously this first issue, it so to say, it delayed the adoption of those necessary resolutions. Obviously we continue our work even today, and having visited yet another conference in Rotterdam, RIPE 86, we've sought a temporary blocking mechanism for IP addresses. It's exercised upon the application by the holder, which is accompanied by a number of legal documents to freeze an IP address. But the problem is that in the occupied territories there are problems with notaries. Such system still exists until there is a new system is developed and implemented. I mean the policy how it all should be working. On the Ukrainian part, the Victoria and Andrii were working actively on that issue, and now we're waiting for a second part of the discussion of this policy. And I want to address all of the Ukrainian community to take active part in this discussion with their proposals, so that they don't stand aside. I want to stress that the community doesn't mean that you have to be a telecommunications operator like my company, but you journalists, every single Ukrainian can express their concerns or submit their proposals. So any member of the community who obviously understands anything about this issue. And the key event in RIPE 86 was the discussion of the destiny of our leaders, not only Ukrainian leaders, but I have to emphasize that this year there were 199 leaders registered during RIPE 86. So for today, our civil work, our public work with Victoria, because we were addressing the community multiple times, please take part. If you don't get engaged in this very important discussion, all the decisions will be taken without you. So have your opinion taken into account, please. Obviously, question of the increase of the commissions was raised there. So for the year 2024 there will be no increase of the membership fees, and we're taking care currently of the operators who end up in the areas of active battles, those who were not able to leave occupation, who end up under occupation, who were not able to pay their annual membership fees. The IP addresses will not be taken away from them, but we want to have them exempt from the membership fees this year. You understand, financially they are absolutely drained, so to say. And if there will be more decisions in this area, we will inform you respectively. As to the elections in RIPE NCC, those were the elections to the board of the RIPE NCC, and there were two candidates representing Ukraine. I was one of the candidates who submitted their nominations. A historic remark from Ukraine: no single representative of Ukraine was ever voted for to the board, and the goal was to stay closer to this board of directors, to give the information firsthand. What is the influence of the war on our community? What is the influence on the telecommunications industry? You see, people live in Europe. Obviously, they're concerned with what's going on, but they're too far away. It's quiet in Europe, and in my understanding, we would like to work with them on some universal solutions for the whole of community, and probably even for the global community. Traveling around international conferences, paying for it out of our pocket. Together with Victoria, we try to represent the interests of Ukraine. I had an address about the regional success stories in the circumstances of war, and showing all those slides, I was seeing the reaction of the people. They were shocked. They were shocked by the conditions we have to work in, because every day we have blackouts, we have massive attacks, we have damaged and destroyed infrastructure, we are lacking engineers because they are being mobilized. So we keep in touch to make sure that Ukrainian internet segment is not fragmented from the global network, so that our population has honest news, so they understand what's going on. Obviously, the main thing is to demonstrate to the international community that we're not worse. We have something to teach the international community. The way that we went through the winter, through all those blackouts, through all those problems, the way our engineers are risking their lives to recover the networks, it's worth respect. And I have to say that today the global community is very interested in having us share our experience. So RIPE ACC was very interested in that, and Irina Muravska has currently established the task force, a working group, the main goal of which is to document what the operators were doing to stay in touch during the war. And this practice is very useful not only for the global community, not only in those regions of the natural disasters, for example, and unfortunately it's not the first and not the last war in the world. We are a successful example of telecommunications segment operation, but unfortunately with all the forces we're given a way to communicate to the global community that we are part of the professional community. We have something even to teach you. There are still such traders like Maxim Tulyev, who in fact fled the country in illegal way, and who from abroad discredits us as a Ukrainian community, because even before the elections he posted in his web page a planned coordinated discreditation program. It's a big messenger. You know, there was a post in Facebook where in fact all of the members of RIPE NCC were asked to vote against me. So to me it means that I'm doing something in the right way. Probably we're doing the right job and we're moving in the right direction, but I would like to communicate that unfortunately such traders, they communicate with Russian community, Russian traders, and they openly urge to vote against me. So along with Dmitro Kokhmanyuk, another nominee from Ukraine, we were not voted in. So the Ministry of Digital Transformation supported two candidates, Olena Kushnir and Dmytro Tokhmanyuk, and none was voted in. So I addressed the community of leaders that these activities, they don't discredit me as a person, but they mostly discredit our Ukrainian community, because such situations are a black stain in our reputation. And if in future we're continuing to ask the international community for some help, no one will respond. But I urge the Ukrainian community now, we can discuss, we can be competitors, we can agree or disagree with this draft law or with each other, and we can discuss different topics, but we have to stand united. It's war, and during the war we have to hold the ranks. We have to stand united and work in the interest of Ukraine, first of all. Miss Olena, it's year 10 of the war, and it's surprising to hear something like some international organizations continue saying something about neutrality and some similar things. I think that in the beginning, back in the years 2014, 2015, we were going through this problem in all of the spheres, in all of the industries, in our relations with the international organizations. But I thought we're through this, and now it seems like in all the industries everybody understands who is aggressor, who commits terroristic acts in our territory. Doesn't it say about the fact that the community is not consolidated enough, and what should we do? Maybe Ms. Victoria would say, what can we do to consolidate those efforts so that this powerful community works in the international arena, so that such issues in year 2023 are not being brought up? Will those policies that you offer, will they help in this process? Thank you very much for this question. Thank you for this opportunity to take part in today's meeting. First of all, I would like to pay your attention to the fact that today we had to have 5 participants of the press conference. We were inviting 2 representatives of the provider from the temporarily occupied territories who were able to make it to the Ukrainian controlled territory, and they could tell you from the first hand, so to say, what is going on with the IP addresses, with the internet providers, with the temporarily occupied territories, what's going on with the IP resource, and how they were able to protect it. We were talking about it for a long time, but at the very last moment our colleagues said that unfortunately they would not be able to join us because their close ones, their families are in the temporarily occupied territories, and any publicity in the media with the name of the company, with the name of the town, may be of harm to their families. They told us our story, and we understand them quite clear, and there are dozens of such stories for the time being. There are internet providers, there are representatives of internet providers who stay in the temporarily occupied territories, who are being tortured, who cannot go to Ukrainian controlled territory. They are either forced to cooperate with the occupational regime or try to avoid any contacts with them, which is very difficult given the situation. And we understand that the families of those people are under threat. So unfortunately for today we can only talk about such people in incognito regime. As a representative of internet provider whose network was under occupation in Kherson, I can say that we were keeping silent about what was going on because we were concerned with the life and health of our employees and what's going on. There are very anti-humane activities against citizens. But getting back to the internet, in fact, the situation with so what the occupiers do in the temporarily occupied territories, what do they do first? Like Olena has already mentioned, first of all, they shut down the cellular networks. They shut down the telecommunications tower, they take full control of the internet networks, they switch the equipment, and they do everything to take control of the network, to administer it. They switch all of the traffic to Russian internet channels. Miranda Media is a Crimean internet provider which in fact was created to provide services to the occupied territories in LPR, DPR, and those territories that are currently under temporary occupation. The occupiers steal equipment, they torture the technical specialists, the owners of internet networks, and they force them to cooperation. It's clear that under pressure, under the threat to their lives, you know, specifically the technical specialists who don't risk any financial assets, any property, they are forced to cooperate. They administer the networks, they give away all the passwords, all the ways to access, and we know about the cases of registration of internet resources, those who already switched from UA to RU zone. There are cases of transfers that RIPE NCC doesn't see as involuntary, and as long as our providers are under occupation, we cannot say whether those switches were voluntary, and we cannot find out. We will only find out after the occupation. What we were told by our colleagues, what we have found out just now. In April 2022, when they were seeing the way the occupiers were doing in the occupied networks, how they switched their networks, how they work with the internet providers, they addressed RIPE NCC, they were realizing that there is a huge threat that the internet resources may be stolen. So they addressed RIPE NCC with again, I'm reminding you, it was way before we started dealing with this issue with Olena, before we went to Belgrade, because it was back in October, November, and that situation I'm telling you about was in April, before the full-scale invasion, and before there were numerous situations. The addresses by Internet Association of Ukraine to RIPE NCC, and no mechanisms were engaged to protect the internet resources, unfortunately, to this day. So our colleagues that had to be here, they addressed RIPE NCC, and they got a ticket that your application is accepted. Then they got a response that we are concerned about your situation, we'll see what we can do about your resources, IP resources. And after a certain period, the colleagues have appealed again, and they've got a response from RIPE NCC that RIPE NCC would take to their attention those IP addresses, and they will not admit any transfers with regard to those IP addresses, but there is no mechanism to prevent the transfer. And our colleagues were understanding it in the beginning of the summer that that's it. The communication in those territories is lost, all the channels are switched, everything is under full control of Russians. The networks are cut from the Ukrainian segment of the internet, technologically, so to say, because as they're being shut down, all the citizens of the occupied territories, they end up not only under territorial but under information blockade, because all the access to Ukrainian means of communication, messengers, news channels will be blocked. Everything where they can get faithful information about the war, everything will be blocked. So our colleagues requested the transfer, and they got the acceptance for the transfer. I'll tell you how it was happening. RIPE NCC gave them the request for notarized documents for transfer, and they agreed to exercise it. What this transfer resulted in for our colleagues: according to the policy, the holder of addresses, specifically IPv4 resource, which is responsible for transfer of this resource to another holder, or I would rather say the resources which are being transferred are being blocked for 24 months, 2 years for further transfer, and this provider was forced to make some creative solutions to transfer this IP resource to his own company, and only in this way they could freeze it. And so they exercised that transfer, and RIPE NCC agreed to it, but we can imagine it could be happening under pressure. The documents could be counterfeit. So that was the situation by the end of the last year, and we don't know about the number of such situations. Obviously, this provider, they protected their resource, but such transfers, they may be happening in one direction or an opposite. So for the time being, and by the way, our colleagues, they agreed to provide a more comprehensive response for the time being in incognito mode, but they're ready to verify all that information after the territory is deoccupied. So they take full responsibility of the faithfulness of this information. Another cases that we're aware of, there are companies whose owners have no idea who administers their IP resources, how they're being transferred. They don't realize the policies of RIPE NCC. They don't realize how the IP addresses are being transferred, how all those processes are going on in general. And it's usually the responsibility of technical directors, technical specialists, and administrators in the companies. So what's going on with other situations, with other addresses that we have? There are owners, for example, who don't even suspect that their IP addresses are migrating somewhere, that they are re-registered. There are technical specialists who are being threatened. There are documented cases of threats related to handover of the administration of IP resources, and there are cases of re-registration of such IP resources for newly created companies in Russia. Some of them are on the brink of transfer, and the cases that we're hearing about from our colleagues, it's impossible to do it in the occupied territories, but after they leave the occupied territories, the colleagues come for us for consultation, and we do everything we can to help them. And for the time being, those processed cases, we submit them to RIPE NCC. They are already documented. In other cases, we verify where there were transfers or not. Is it re-registration, or is it the change in the database of RIPE NCC? Thank you very much, Miss Victoria. Mr. Andrii, the question will be to you as to the lawyer. Obviously, we understand that any changes that are going on in any community, usually they are efficient when the community is involved. This is how the things work in our life. And we need a little bit of engagement from the state, and it sometimes brings some good results. But we see what the community can do, what can community do within the international legal framework, how can we reinforce their work in the work with RIPE, the sanctions, are they possible in this area, and how they can be applied to some legal entities, other participants of the market, and the state. To what extent can the government be engaged in this process? Maybe they are already, engaged? Thank you very much for this question. First of all, we've logically achieved some proposals that result from all those horrors described by Olena and Victoria. Now, in the temporarily occupied territories, the Russians not only steal the latrines, they pillage everything, grain and home appliances and internet resources. That's really a very valuable resource, and they do everything they can to capture the businesses in full, the venues, the facilities, and they try to capture the internet resources too. We are in discussion with RIPE for a long period, and unfortunately it's not the only situation, and RIPE is not the only organization who adheres to neutrality. We know about the Yermak group, which monitors the organizations who make way around the sanctions, who develop the mechanisms to use the sanctions in a targeted manner. Even in November 2022, there was a report by this group about the IP technologies and adjacent technologies used by Russia to support the armed aggression. Why is it all necessary for our community? How does it influence our community? First of all, when Russia captures all those resources, there is no internet. They cut off all the normal internet resources, normal applications. They cut off everything that exists in democratic world. It starts working there. They only allow those resources to work that FSB and Russia wants to work. For example, they captured some providers in temporarily occupied territories. They provide internet, but this internet, even as commercials, even as social networks or groups, and camouflaged as any other technologies that Russia may engage, there will be only the narratives that Ukraine is shelling the peaceful population, Ukraine detonated a nuclear bomb, Ukraine detonated the demo of Kakhovka HPP. Russia only uses it to achieve their military goals. Now we see how internet has become a direct instrument of not only hybrid but direct war. The people are being forced to go to the conscription centers that are being established there. People are being forced to believe what's going on. People are brainwashed by propaganda. They're being engaged in illegal armed formations, and they go and kill Ukrainians. That's the first very simple example. Second, you mentioned the sanctions after annexation of Crimea, after what has happened to those illegal terroristic organizations, DPR and LPR. The European Union and United States imposed the sanctions, but those sanctions, they have a lot of white stains. For example, back in 2018, DPR and LPR were added to the sanction list, but it seems that's it. If DPR is on the list, no one can work with them. So, saying in simple words, it's a good idea, but if we look closer, we see that DPR or LPR are no legal entities. It's not even an authority that works with RIPE. So what's present in RIPE? There is some guy from Moscow who in fact acts as a state telecommunication authority of DPR, but this guy is not added to the sanctions. It's the abbreviation DPR which is added to the sanction list. They have no agreement with RIPE, for example, but all those functions are being exercised by that guy. Okay, but do we know that random person? You know, all those re-registrations are happening so quickly that you cannot catch him to add him to the sanction list. For example, the sanctions are being reviewed on a semi-annual basis. Before even they identify somebody and add somebody to the sanction list, they already register it to another person. So in RIPE database there is There is a DPR telecommunications network, location is Russia or DPR, and it all originates from Donetsk or Luhansk. And when you see it, you understand that this RIPE neutrality is a very dangerous thing, very dangerous for Ukrainian community, because first of all, Ukrainian community plays no role there. Everything that was taken away from them, we can say it's stolen from them. They will never have those resources back. All those DPR, LPR, all those illegal administrations in Crimea, Zaporizhia and Kherson regions where they established those administrations, they start submitting documents to RIPE that confirm the establishment of a legal entity, or with the passport of the individual. RIPE still is neutral. For RIPE, neutrality means that they accept everything from everybody. They accept the documents from legal entity of DPR, which is confirmed by the statute of DPR, the register, which is confirmed by the register created in DPR. So RIPE registers them and enters into agreement for provision of services. If the sanctions are more tight, so to say, if they could be worked out in a way that all the related individuals or entities are being added to the sanction list, that they should be treated in the same way as DPR or LPR. For example, if we talk about them, we automatically talk about all the associated entities. Unfortunately, such things do not exist so far. Regarding those illegal documents, RIPE accepts those documents, they register these new identities, and those new entities, and those new entities are usually stolen ones, stolen from Ukrainian providers. Stolen equipment, stolen IP addresses, stolen resources of the Ukrainian providers who used to operate in that territory. So acceptance by RIPE kind of confirms that RIPE allows either intentionally or unintentionally to re-register those addresses that are stolen. For the time being, we have processed the applications by Ukrainian providers. We got set a channel of communication with RIPE, and through this channel of communication, we submit the first request to cancel the registration of IP resources. We hope that they will agree to our proposals, to our requests from the Ukrainian community providers. We would like to believe it. However, for the time being, this issue is still very painful and sensitive to us. Andrii, it sounds like a dead end, and I hope we will find the way out somehow. Probably we will have to engage our partners who support us just like they supported us in other areas. You know that we were supported by the European Union, Great Britain, United States. Maybe we should go that way. Yes, we're going this way, and we go many other multiple ways. Well, now you see, we see how difficult it sounds for Ukrainian community, for the businesses that are engaged for internet. Well, I'll tell you more, it sounds difficult even for any Ukrainian. Yeah, it's not just a situation that is like unpleasant. This is the situation that results in use of internet for direct military purposes in occupied territories. They steal internet from us, and they use it to recruit new military, new people who will hate Ukraine, whom they will force to go fight against Ukraine. This is very important. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Maybe you have some questions. Please join our conversation. Good afternoon. Olena and Victoria, you were talking about your travel to Belgrade, and you said that you were voting for full blocking of transfers all across Ukraine. Can you please summarize what was it done for, and what was the purpose that you were the goal that you were pursuing? Yes, I will answer this question. I was telling you about the situation, about what's going on in the occupied territories, about how our colleagues were looking for the ways and mechanisms to protect their IP addresses, and we didn't know how many more similar attempts there could be, because we had applications before, we had reports about that before, and RIPE had no mechanism for that, and the legal people from RIPE and CC, they proposed certain solutions. There was an article with those solutions before I traveled to Belgrade, and among those solutions was full freezing of transfers. Well, you understand, if we freeze all the transfers all across Ukraine, they cannot go either from occupied territory or to occupied territory or to Russia or any other third countries. Well, it was also proposed to create the button of voluntary blocking. Is the policy that we joined, that we continue working on, and there was a number of other solutions which contemplated government involvement or without government involvement, but upon a number of consultations in Belgrade with representatives of RIPE ACC, we've seen and we've proposed such solution of temporary freeze of all the transfers. We were talking about temporary as 3 months, because 3 months is a period for PDP process, the policy development process, to create a new mechanism. So the proposal was like that, to freeze everything for 3 months, and within those 3 months to develop a mechanism. So getting back to the colleagues that we were talking about today, they told us it's a shame there was no such an opportunity to solve your problem in one application, because back then we had no resources to sit around and continue pushing RIPE NCC, because the occupiers act quickly and the decisions have to be taken quickly. Back then we were seeing a decision of that kind. It was not good, it was not bad, it was temporarily. Yeah, very good remark. And RIPE NCC told us that we're not against, but only in case the Ukrainian community, specifically those operators that use IP addresses as the fundamentals of their networks, if they have nothing against and if they support this proposal, if they write us that within they don't oppose to having the addresses transferred to other holders. But if I understand, I'm an operator of an internet network. I don't want to enter into any collaboration. I don't intend to leave the country. My network continues working. I intend to continue working in Ukraine. I don't use my IP addresses for any resale. Obviously, I would not oppose it. And we asked the Ukrainian community, we asked them, do you oppose or don't you oppose? There is such a decision for everybody who works in the non-occupied territory of Ukraine, who intends to continue their work. Let's all stand together and protect those operators that end up in the occupied territories. We don't know what's going on there, and there may be a number of very difficult situations about which we find out post factum. And unfortunately, those decisions, probably there were operators who provided their support, but we were writing through formal and informal groups like Telecom Ukraine or UKOS, where we communicate. There were public appeals on the social networks. Some operators did not oppose. they were saying, I'm not intending to transfer my IP addresses to anybody, and still there were IP traders for whom it was just a business who blocked this decision, and obviously it was all suspended. For RIPE community, it's called the absence of consensus. They see that the community does not agree with this decision. There are some who categorically opposes, and in RIPE.cc it works like I don't act as a community, and Olena Kushnir is no community. We are just one unit. Everybody votes for themselves. Everybody submits their vote. And the system works like this. I propose the solution. If the members of community support it, RIPE and CC would start thinking, and they would start implementing this issue. If there is no consensus, then this issue is disregarded, and it was disregarded back then, but we still continued our work, and RIPE NCC implemented those measures for half a year. The IP addresses which are in UA and RU zone are being paid close attention to, and the registration requires additional legal documents. We honestly appreciate the input of RIPE and CC, but we don't see it as a hell of a protection, so to say. Thanks to continuation of our work, we developed the recommendations to create the policy for voluntary freezing of transfer. It's a mechanism that allows me as a holder of IP address, in case of danger, to freeze the transfers. I voluntarily say, RIPE NCC, hold my addresses for 6 months. It's been accepted, and that's it. No one can claim those IP addresses, and it results in no risks. But unfortunately, when such discussions are going on, when the blocking of some decisions is being blocked, the mechanisms that we need, they start being postponed, and the decision which is about to be taken, we already have a developed policy. We are into phase 2 of the discussion, and I'm urging the community, no matter where you are, either in occupied or not occupied territory, are you in comfortable or non-comfortable conditions, please join our discussion. We fight in every front, and information front is very important. Please get engaged in these processes. Understand what's going on, because it's very important. It's important in terms of preservation of our segment of internet. This is why such solutions were proposed, and in difficult situations there are no good or bad solutions. There are difficult and non-difficult solutions. Now it's postponed, and it's been more than 1 year into the full-scale invasion, and the mechanism for protection, for reliable protection, is not yet developed. Thank you very much. We have more questions. Please, friends, our time is running out very quickly. I would like to ask about the figures. The losses of telecommunications market of Ukraine, which resulted from the full-scale invasion of Russia. Do you know what was the number of internet providers who left that occupied territories? How many are still working there? Thank you. I'll try to give you the answer to your question. Thank you. It's a very interesting question. We are not aware of such statistics, unfortunately, because there are directors, the owners of internet providers who stay there. Some of them lost control over their networks. We found such owners, and we asked them to address police for initiating of criminal cases, so that the government knows that they are not in control of their IP resources and networks anymore. We know that there is a statistics by the World Bank about the financial losses of telecommunications market. It means equipment, costly equipment, the networks, the IP resources. and the membership fees that were not received, and it also includes the human factor. Not all of the providers who did not leave the occupied territories, they are not good or bad because they have their reasons. You know, there is a significant influence on the life and health of those people, threat to their life and health. So those who made it to Ukrainian controlled territory, you know, we were talking to owners of the network for whom it took a number of times to make it through, because the telecommunications operator is the critical infrastructure, and Russia targets them first. So regarding the financial losses, it's open information that you can find in internet, but I would like also to add to what Victoria said about those preventive measures. When we were asking to freeze everything, we preserved a lot of IP resources. I was preparing a presentation where it shows a number of transfers which were made from the territory of Ukraine, and really it's a huge work. But I would like to specify that in discussion of the policy, not only leaders can take part, but it may be any individual. They're not registered. They don't show it during discussion of the policy. This is what Maxim Tulyev did, who was asking his friends. They started spamming, just spamming, and they added this destructive element to our reputation, and the reputation of Ukrainian telecommunication community was unfortunately stained. Andrii, your last remark. Thank you very much. I would like to add in answer to your question that it's important to show not only the figures but the effect, what it resulted in. According to the research of the Freedom House in 2022 in Ukraine, the freedom of internet was significantly limited, not due to Ukraine but due to Russia having captured the territory of Ukraine. They turned that internet into Russian one. They tightened the knots in their territory. They restricted the access to democratic resources over there and in the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine too. And those figures are quite big. What they restricted, how they restricted the access to the free internet in occupied territories. So leaving internet in those territories only to make sure that they can continue their propaganda against Ukraine, against European Union, United States, Great Britain and others. Well, to me it seems no good option. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for this conversation and this meeting. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. Now we understand that there is a lot of work to be done in certain directions to balance and to seek acceptance including by our community, by our society, to work on the security of our community, our country. And our next briefing will be at 1500. We will be talking about situation in Zaporizhia. Joining us will be the head of Zaporizhia Regional Administration. So stay tuned, work together for our victory, and glory to Ukraine.